Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to another live stream. It's been some time since I've been live, so thank you all for coming out on this Saturday evening. It should be a great stream. Before I go live, before I really get started, though, can you please give me a quick sound check? How's my microphone, StreamYard settings? Were giving me indication that there might have been some feedback. I'm hoping no feedback. I'm hoping that there's nothing interfering with my audio. How is it going, everyone? Good evening. Please give me a quick sound check. I really appreciate everyone coming out. I took a little bit of a break. I'll get to that at the end of the stream, but we have a lot of developments to cover, and I'm so glad to be back. Actually, I've been really itching because, the world is fast changing. This is what this channel is all about. We are trying to do the best work that we can to cover these developments in the multipolar world, and I really appreciate all of the supporters, everyone who is out here tonight. As we get started, everyone, it is important to like the stream, please. I really appreciate it. That helps get more people in the stream, boosts the algorithm, and all that good stuff. Of course, you can support this work. You can support my work. You can support this channel on Patreon at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. So please do go to the video description, find Patreon. You can find Substack as well, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and so many more options. I want to say hello to all the moderators here this evening. I see Desert Mantis, I see Ware Pilgrim, and I will shout. I see Connie Reed here tonight. Thanks so much for coming out, and thanks to all of the viewers who are here, all of the paid supporters, and all of those who have come to be regulars here on these live streams. I am so glad to be back. So we have a full lineup tonight, everyone. I am going to cover so many things. I'm going to cover Emmanuel Macron and pardon my bad French, but I'm going to cover Macron's recent comments about NATO troops in Ukraine and him calling for them, as well as the leaked audio coming out of the German Air Force, all of which point to NATO's World War III trajectory with Russia. We say it time and time and again here. This is very real. And now we have demonstrative proof, even more proof than we already had, that not only are they planning a broader and bigger war with Russia via vis-a-vis Ukraine, but I'm going to show how this has always been the case and how troops on the ground in Ukraine is already a reality. So we're going to cover that. We're going to cover Vladimir Putin's speech to the Federal Assembly, which really could be seen as a response to these provocations. He had the Western media, he had the collective West freaking out over his comments to the Federal Assembly. So we will cover this too. And I'm going to cover friend of the show, George Galloway's election victory in Rochdale. He is now once again a member of Parliament in the locality of Rochdale, and he won in large part because of what's happening in Palestine, the onslaught, the slaughter, the genocide in Gaza, as well as his opposition overall to empire. And we're going to go over exactly how this happened and the reactions. I think that's really important. The reactions from the neocons, from little Rishi Sunak, and the Western mainstream media. We're going to go over all of that. And if there's time, I'm hoping at the end, this might be a little bit of a longer live stream, so you'll be with me for a while. We're going to cover the situation in Palestine from a little bit of a different perspective. During the Galloway, coverage, I will talk about the context which has led to this momentous victory for George Galloway and what it means for broader popular support for Gaza and dwindling support for Israel and its Western backers. But I'm also going to cover, at least I hope I can get to it, the fact that the entire world, the multipolar world, in recent weeks has been standing up for Palestine in ways that are major and huge and should give us hope. A lot of people out here are hopeless. They're feeling war fatigue. They're feeling absolutely, especially in the collective West, at a loss for words and actions, and are feeling incredibly torn down by what Israel is doing. And I want to demonstrate that actually there is a massive amount of support coming through to Gaza. But of course, a lot of this rests on how we are able to stop the American empire, the U.S. empire, and its collective West vassals from giving Israel the blank check. So I'm going to go over all of that because Russia, China, Nicaragua, Cuba have all been coming up huge for Gaza of late. And I want to cover that at the end. So we have a huge stream tonight. So we're going to get to our first story. Before we do, of course, hit that like button. I got announcements coming up too at the end of the stream. Make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell, and be sure to join as a YouTube member. Go to Patreon, become a member there. That's the best place to support this work. The video description is all the places where you can support me. But it's been so long, and I'm so glad to be back with all of you. I truly do enjoy doing these streams, and there has just been so much going on. I just could not believe the number of developments as I was racking my brain over, I'll get to it at the end, what I was doing and what I had to take care of. But as all these developments were occurring, I was thinking, wow, I just wanted to get on stream. So I got announcements at the end of the program, so do stick around. Let us get started for the first story. All right. And for those of you who are tuning in later on, there will be a timestamp where you can get through the live introduction and all of that. So go to the video description, hit that timestamp so you can skip up until the first story. So here we go. We're going to get right to it. NATO has crossed Russia's red line again and again and again. And most recently, this has occurred in relation to France and Germany too. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Emmanuel Macron's comments at the end of February, where he remarked into the shock, supposedly, of other NATO members that France and NATO as a whole were not ruling out putting troops on the ground in Ukraine. Of course, this amounts to a major escalation. It would amount to essentially a NATO confrontation with Russia because Ukraine is, of course, in a conflict with Russia. So these comments were provided by Emmanuel Macron at the end of February, and they sent shockwaves across the collective West. And the response in particular was quite interesting. We first have to look at how the New York Times reported on the response. So this is most important because in many ways, Emmanuel Macron's comments were not simply some kind of misgiving or mistake or error on his part. What he did was simply take the mask off. So the New York Times reported right afterwards that seeking to unsettle Russia, Macron actually provokes allies. The French president's openness to Western troops in Ukraine signaled a quest for military resolve, but some allies felt blindsided. So there is Mr. Macron looking very confident. So just listen to what Roger Cohen has to say, and we're going to read this briefly and then go on to the other stories in reaction to this. So it says, with his jolted, unexpected statement that sending Western troops to Ukraine, quote unquote, should not be ruled out, President Emmanuel Macron of France has shattered a taboo, ignited a debate, spread dismay among allies, and forced a reckoning on Europe's future. For an embattled leader who loathes lazy thinking, longs for Europe of military strength, and loves the limelight, this was typical enough. It was Mr. Macron, after all, who in 2019 described NATO as suffering from brain death, who last year warned Europe against becoming America's strategic vassal. But bold pronouncements are one thing, and patiently putting the pieces in place to attain these objectives another. Macron has often favored provocation over preparation, even if he often has a point, as in arguing in 2017 that Europe needed to bolster its defense industry to greater strategic heft. This week was no exception. By lurching forward without building consensus among allies, Mr. Macron may have done more to illustrate Western divisions and the limits of how far NATO allies are willing to go in defense of Ukraine than achieve the quote-unquote strategic ambiguity he says is needed to keep Vladimir Putin of Russia guessing. So what's really interesting about this, about what Macron did, is that it was supposed to be, in the eyes of Macron, and Macron is a very arrogant neocon. He's a banker. He is incredibly arrogant, and he does not think strategically per se, even though he was calling for strategic ambiguity. What the New York Times is saying, what the overall neocon foreign policy establishment of the collective West, led by the United States, are saying about Macron is that his mouth is looser than his actions, that his mouth is incredibly loose, and that he will essentially say anything to look big, to look tough. And this has caused great divisions. And so what Macron did was not build unity, even though I believe that NATO is in unison. They do agree with eventually confronting Russia directly, that there will, in their minds, be a confrontation between Russia and NATO at some point in the near future. It's just that the timing isn't correct because, as they will say here, there is a lot of division within NATO right now. Bloomberg, right? So it says here, as we go on, it will talk about how there are divisions between, for example, Germany and France, as well as other countries, the United States, Sweden, Olaf Scholz not only ruled out German forces, but any ground troops from European countries or NATO. And this is really preposterous, as we'll show later in this segment, that in fact, there is no division among confronting Russia and going to war. It's the means with which you do it and how you present it. So the New York Times wrote this piece talking about how disastrous this was, echoing German media, echoing so-called NATO allies. This was the trend across the Western mainstream media. Here you have Reuters also talking about Macron's Ukraine troop talk shakes up NATO allies. So over and over, it was spoken about in the Western mainstream media as a divisive move, not one that's agreed with. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why is it that despite NATO's big rhetoric and ultimately its incredibly expensive outpouring of support to Ukraine over the last few years, and we just entered the third year of the proxy war, why is it that NATO is backing off? That's a really important question. And it's one that is also answered by Germany's own provocation toward World War III that was leaked out by RT's editor. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But French President Emmanuel Macron wanted to create strategic ambiguity by openly discussing the idea of sending Western troops to Ukraine. But he was also so ambiguous that he sparked confusion and irritation among some allies. So his comment at a late night news conference after hosting Western leaders to rally support for Ukraine fitted with his reputation as a diplomatic disruptor who likes to break taboos and challenge conventional thinking. So while, and this is interesting because the New York Times had similar comments, his comments may turn out to be prescient and pave the way for greater direct Western involvement in the war against Ukraine, in the war in Ukraine against Russia's invasion sometime down the line. So again, the Western mainstream media was very clear that while Emmanuel Macron is annoying, while he may have been incorrect in stating this as he did at this moment in time, both the New York Times, I didn't show it, but here in Reuters, they say, and if you read it in one publication in the Western mainstream media, you're likely to see it in others. They talk about down the line, this might be true. And I'm going to show you how exactly serious that is. So you had the United States, you had Germany, Britain, Italy, Spain, Poland, Czech Republic, all of them distanced themselves from these comments. But nonetheless, they happened. And you would think Emmanuel Macron would have some humility, right? He messed up pretty bad. That there would be some maybe retraction, maybe some editing of the comments, maybe some clarification to his NATO allies. But actually, Macron doubled down on the Ukraine remarks after the blowback. He reiterated the seriousness of his remarks when he said he would not rule out sending Western troops into Ukraine. Macron said he carefully chose his words and doubled down on his statement despite the criticism he received in his country and internationally. These are serious issues. Every one of the words I say on this issue is weighed, thought through, and measured. So earlier this week, while hosting 27 European Union nation representatives, Macron said sending troops to help counter Russia's intensified offensive should not be ruled out. So he doubled down. Unsurprising, because his back was put up against the wall. He already is massively unpopular. And as you can see, he's somewhat unpopular amongst the United States and Germany. Bloomberg had this panic article about Macron and Olaf Scholz' so-called divisions. So there's trouble in the in paradise, in the barbarous paradise that is NATO stan. Okay, to echo Pepe Escobar's wording. There is trouble in the waters, and there's a lot of divisions. And why is that? Well, for one, what Emmanuel Macron said is something that already is true in Le Monde. Right after these comments were made and reacted to by the Western mainstream media, put out this article. They said Ukraine's Western allies already have a military presence in the country. When French President Emmanuel Macron spoke of potentially sending military reinforcements to Ukraine, he unintentionally lifted the veil on the pre-existing presence of Western personnel on Ukrainian soil. So I'm not going to read the whole article. I just want to go down where they talk about this. Okay. So it says, this controversy ignited by Macron at the start of the week has opened up a debate that some consider to be an open secret. All the allied states have a presence in Ukraine. It's not a question of combat units, but they're representatives of each intelligence service, for example, said a Ukrainian diplomatic source who requested anonymity to speak candidly. They said they were pleased that the question of strengthening the allied military presence in their country has been in the air since December. If there are arms deliveries, there must be people there physically giving information on how to use the equipment. Ukraine is also being used as a testing ground for new equipment. Drones are tested there. These kinds of professionals are on the ground, of course. And who are the professionals on the ground? Well, they talk a little bit about it. There's a 12 CIA bases. That was reported by the New York Times, and I'll pull that up in a second. But beyond the small number of personnel we do have in the country supporting the armed forces of Ukraine, we haven't got any large-scale plans for deployment. So that was Rishi Sunak's spokesperson. However, the mainstream British media at the end of 2022 reported Robert McGowan's, a former commander general of the Royal Marines, admitting that 350 soldiers had been present, British soldiers, between January and April 2022 for special operations involving a high degree of political and military risk. His words have never been denied by London, are in line with the longstanding presence of British troops, British instructors within Ukrainian military staff due to cooperation initiated as early as 2014 and after Crimea was annexed or was federated by Russia. So, in a sense, Britain is already there. NATO is already in Ukraine, and it would be ridiculous to think otherwise, given that there has been tens of billions, hundreds of billions, over $100 billion plus worth of US, German, NATO aid that has to be accounted for and cannot just be given to an army that was literally built by NATO over a 10-year plus period. And so here is the report on the CIA by the New York Times. So the New York Times reported this just before Macron made his comment, the spy war, how the CIA secretly helps Ukraine fight Putin. For more than a decade, the United States has nurtured a secret intelligence partnership with Ukraine that is now critical for both countries countering Russia. And in this image, what the caption says, a Ukrainian soldier in a forest near Russian lines this month. A CIA-supported network of spy bases has been constructed in the past 8 years that includes 12 secret locations along the Russian border. So the New York Times was reporting this. So all in all, we have to ask ourselves, why? Why has the CIA found it so important to build a huge presence inside of Ukraine along the Russian border? Why is it so important for France to make these comments, for Macron to make these comments? Well, the answer is easy. It's important because the United States, NATO, France, Germany as a part of it, they are losing right now. They are not winning this conflict. And we are seeing a kind of unraveling that as Ukraine lost Avdiivka, as Ukraine is getting pushed further and further along that front line, as Russia's war of attrition is more and more successful, and as the aid dries up from the United States, from NATO, to any degree that will be significant from here on out in the conflict, we are seeing cracks within the NATO so-called unity. So that is why this is happening. That is why these leaks are coming out now. And it wasn't just France, because Bloomberg reported that there's huge problems, that the United States, that the West are so worried about Germany and France's conflict, that there's a conflict between these two countries within NATO, and that it needs to be rectified if there's going to be any pathway forward for Ukraine. In many ways, what Bloomberg and the collective West, the United States, are saying is that they need Germany and France to take more responsibility for Ukraine, and divisions means that that's not going to happen. But nonetheless, Germany is also under fire. So it's not just France. Macron, he got the finger wagged at him. Don't say that. Washington, right? Washington is ultimately the master. Do not say that. And all of the NATO stand countries came together and said, we're going to distance ourselves from that because at this point, game over for Ukraine. So there's no reason to provoke Russia even further, even as Germany now, and this is a story that they do not want to cover. The Western mainstream media does not want to cover this story. And that is the news that RT reported on and released that Germany's top military leaders within the Air Force were discussing openly, and I'm going to play this report now, discussing openly an operation to attack, to help Ukraine bomb the Crimean Bridge, which has been bombed, of course, or attacked by numerous means through terrorist acts over the last several years. So here we go. Oh. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I played the wrong thing. um, Wrong video. So here we go. This is actually the report. That was a different. Where is it? Okay. They're called the same thing. So here we go. This should be it.
Crimean Bridge. That news. The German army has considered a strike on the Crimean Bridge. That's according to a leaked 40 minutes conversation between high-ranking German military leaders. Let's take a listen.
I came to the conclusion that there are two interesting targets, the bridge in the east and the ammunition depots above. The bridge in the east is hard to reach. It's a rather small target, but the Taurus can do it. The ammunition depots can also be hit. If we consider the bridge, I don't think Taurus is enough, and we need to have an idea of how it might work, and for that, we need satellite data. I don't know if we can train the Ukrainians for such a task in a short time, and we are talking about a month. What would a Taurus attack on the bridge look like? From an operational perspective, I can't estimate how quickly the Ukrainians will be able to learn how to plan such an action and how quickly integration will occur. But since we are talking about the bridge and military bases, I understand they want to get them as soon as possible.
The full transcript of the audio conversation also contains a discussion on how to avoid being a part of the conflict and how to do everything possible to keep Chancellor Scholz out of it. The officers also referred to the long-time involvement of the US and UK in the Ukrainian conflict. We'll bring you all the details on the...
So, I mean, there you have it. That is, it's damning. And I'll play you a little clip from this, actually, because I do have a small clip from the actual leaked audio, which has a transcript, not too long, just a few seconds. It was translated. So let me pull that up because this is damning. Of course, the United States, wherever Germany is militarily through NATO, the United States is right there. So here is the leaked audio, and I'll read if it's, let me see how they do it. If it's just English translation, I will read the English. Here we go. I can quickly add, because we took a close look at it, and the bridge is unfortunately like an airfield due to its size. In other words, it may well be that I need 10 or 20 missiles for it. They're probably fully appreciated if it's where it opens up when he takes the pillars. Yes, and now the pillar, we might just make a hole in it, and then we're there. So there you have a major command. You have the commander of the Air Force in Germany, as well as his staff talking openly about bombing Crimea Bridge. This is a huge provocation. This is a signal toward World War III. It is that serious. And so both France and Germany play with fire all the time. And this is because at the end of the day, Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, as RT said, Olaf Scholz, they want to keep him out of it. Why? Because the German government is so illegitimate at this point. It has so destroyed its legitimacy, especially through the Nord Stream debacle, which is one of the biggest cover-ups in German history and the history of Europe, one of the biggest blunders. But overall, France and Germany represent through these actions just how dangerous Europe has become to itself and to the rest of the world. Because these countries, Germany and France, Macron, Olaf Scholz, and all of the actors, the state actors that are going along with the US's plan to confront and wage war against Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine, they are demonstrating full-scale suicidal strategy meant to not just aid the United States in its objectives, but also in placing. It's also to place France and Germany in a subservient position to the United States. And wasn't it Macron himself who said, this was right around his visit to China last year, that, well, we don't want to be a vassal to the United States. Well, everything that France did with the NATO troops talk, everything that Germany is doing now shows that the two of the biggest players in NATO, France and Germany, are more concerned with Washington's aims, with the neocon foreign policy establishment aims, than whatever individual differences may exist amongst these countries. Washington, this is what's interesting. Washington is saying it's washing its hands of these comments, of these reports. They're repressing the German story. They don't even want to touch that. They don't want to touch the Crimea issue, because that, of course, is another red line for Russia. But when it comes to France, the United States is the one posing as being opposed in some way to what Macron was saying, that we don't want troops. We're not into a larger conflict with Russia. That's not what we want, which is preposterous, absolutely preposterous, because the United States, through the CIA, through NATO, has logistics, has personnel, has people on the ground, mercenaries, right? Quote unquote. They're all there already. So, all in all, what this shows is that France and Germany are willing to cross the red line for Washington. And why do I keep on saying for Washington? Well, listen to Mr. Lloyd Austin, because Washington official Washington, continuously remarks on how NATO will eventually be fighting in Ukraine against Russia if they don't get the aid. So this is the paradox. If Ukraine doesn't continue getting aid, it'll be Russia that confronts NATO. That's the narrative right now, one that is absolutely fact-free, given everything that Putin has said, everything Russia has done. There's no evidence that Russia is going to be going into open conflict and aggressive posture toward the NATO states, the Baltic states, even Ukraine, right? It's at war with Ukraine, but at the end of the day, Russia would be quickly not at war with Ukraine if Washington was willing to do what was right and pull out of this conflict. But here is Mr. Lloyd Austin to the House Armed Services Committee, what he had to say. If Ukraine loses, I really believe that NATO troops will be fighting Russia. Here we go.
The supplemental. If Ukraine falls, again, Putin won't stop there. He will just continue to move forward and attack and take on the sovereign territory of his neighbors. And so, if you're a Baltic state, you're really worried about whether or not you're next. And so they know Putin. They know that what he's capable of. And quite frankly, if Ukraine falls, I really believe that NATO will be in a fight with Russia.
Generally, time.
NATO will be in a fight with Russia. Washington, as an empire, likes to set up the stage. It wages intense propaganda war. Putin is going after the Baltic states. All NATO's the NATO member states that are neighbors, aka the countries that are encroaching on Russia's border. They are the ones that need to be worried. This is the propaganda spin to ensure that the message at the end, NATO will be fighting with Russia, is justifiable. You see how that works there? So Lloyd Austin blew it open. And then you had the U.S. Army Combined Arms Doctrine Directorate. Yes, that's a real U.S. institution, believe it or not. But I just want to belabor this point that there is a concerted effort to wage war on Russia, to cross these red lines, to eventually begin an open conflict. And it's not just because France and Germany are the ones being the attack dogs. They're the ones out in front right now. But this is Washington's agenda. These are vassal countries. And look at what the U.S. Army Combined Arms Doctrine Directorate, yes, try to say that 10 times fast, had to report. Do you know your enemy? Right? This report was published at the end of February. It says new ATP 7-100.1 Russian Tactics addresses the nation state's military doctrine with a focus on Army ground forces and tactical ops and offense, defense, and related mission sets. Scan the QR link below. So for those who don't know, the U.S. Army Combined Arms Doctrine is an organization that is dedicated to helping train U.S. military personnel on these issues. And these are the reports that it has come up with, of course, with support from the Pentagon. They essentially are writing the materials that guide the U.S. military and what they do. So I wanted to show you that because look at what they said. Do you know your enemy? Russia's the enemy. And if Russia's the enemy, then eventually you're going to be at war with Russia. And that is the point here, that all of these red lines being crossed from Germany to France, Macron, Schultz, the German Air Force, the Crimea, provocations, NATO troops on the ground, CIA along Russia's border. Do you see how all of this adds up to preparing for an open war with Russia, World War III? So this is serious. This is happening. And this is something we have to be aware of. We have to understand who the players are and why they're doing it. Why Germany is doing this. It's not doing it for Germany. Why France is doing this. It's not doing it for France. These elites are in an open state of panic. The empire is crumbling. Ukraine is being destroyed piece by piece along that front line by Russia. The strategic initiative, the trajectory of this conflict is in Russia's favor. This is over. And that's why these divisions, that's why these conflicts, that's why this rhetoric is becoming more and more intense. Because at this moment, NATO has nowhere to go. They don't know what to do. And in the end, only doom can be the fortune of the United States, its NATO vassals, and of course, Ukraine. And that's a tough pill to swallow, and one that we will see continuously be struggled against. Like someone who is trying to recover, withdrawing from alcohol or some other substance, we're going to see the thrashing. We're going to see major symptoms of recovery, which are absolutely dangerous, because these, unlike people who are trying to recover from a substance, the the U.S., NATO, they have, when they thrash about, when they withdraw from the realities of war, they end up waging more war. And that's what they are preparing for with Russia. And that is what we have to prevent at all costs. So I'm going to get to the next story now, okay? Because I have many stories to get to. And let me just pull these up. While you're waiting, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. We have over 6,000 people here, 6,600, amazing, 1,700 likes. Let's get those likes up closer to 2,000, 3,000. That helps boost the algorithm. Everyone who's watching, please hit that like button on YouTube. Welcome everyone on Rumble. You can go to find me on Rumble, rumble.com/DannyDhaiphong or rumble.com. Just search Danny Dhaiphong. Hello, everyone on Rockfin. Appreciate all of you as well. Thanks for joining me in that community. So I'm going to talk about Putin's speech because in many ways, Putin's speech is the warning that needs to be heeded in many ways. And I'm going to review that in a second. I'm just pulling up the materials now. Okay. All right, here we go. Okay, so of course, everyone, while you're waiting too, you can go to the video description and find all the great ways to support this channel from Patreon, Substack, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, more. You can become a YouTube member. Patreon's the best way, and we have a great community over there. So be sure to subscribe if you're able, and it really goes a long way to making sure this work remains sustainable. So I have many clips because this speech in many ways is the response to what is happening here with these provocations. Okay, so we're going to get into it. Here we go. I have announcements at the end too, so everyone stick around because we have at least 2 more stories even after this one, and then announcements. So here we go. Vladimir Putin ended February responding to NATO's war provocations. Of course, his speech to the Federal Assembly in Russia comes as the election, the general election, the presidential election in Russia is just weeks away. But in many ways, Vladimir Putin's speech, a 2-hour-long speech to the Federal Assembly, mind you, was a response to Emmanuel Macron's provocations, NATO's provocations, and of course, the ongoing military aggression, encirclement campaign, and war that the United States and NATO are building up against Russia. And so Vladimir Putin created this speech and outlined in this speech Russia's overall trajectories, but his response, the overall trajectory for Russia coming into 2024 and beyond. But his response that got the most attention, of course, was the warnings that he sent to NATO about what it would mean for example, Emmanuel Macron's wishes for NATO troops to fight Russia, what it would mean for NATO, that this is existential, not just for Russia, but also for NATO itself, that this is a suicide course. And so here is a clip that has gotten the most attention. Okay, so this has got the most attention. Here's a little bit of a transcript, but let's just go right to the video, okay? And I will read the English if there is no voiceover. So here we go.
Запад спровоцировал конфликт на Украине, на Ближнем Востоке, в других.
The West provoked the conflict in Ukraine, the Middle East, and other regions of the world and continues to lie.
регионах мира и продолжает лгать. Теперь вот без всякого смущения заявляют,
Now, without any embarrassment, they claim that Russia is allegedly planning to attack Europe.
что Россия якобы намеревается напасть на Европу. Ну просто мы же с
We all understand that this is nonsense.
вами понимаем, это несут бред просто какой-то. А при этом сами выбирают
At the same time, they themselves choose the most effective means of defeat to strike on our territory.
цели для нанесения ударов по нашей территории, выбирают наиболее эффективные, как они думают, средства поражения. Заговорили
They started talking about sending NATO military contingents to Ukraine, a direct reference to Macron.
о возможности отправки на Украину натовских военных контингентов. Но мы помним,
But we remember the fate of those who once sent their contingents to our territory, talking about World War II in particular.
судьбу тех, кто направлял когда-то свои контингенты на территорию нашей страны. Но теперь
But now the consequences for possible interventions will be much more tragic.
последствия для возможных интервентов будут гораздо более трагичны. Они должны, в конце концов, понимать,
In the end, they must understand that we also have weapons, and they know this. So here's the warnings. And mind you, there was a thunderous applause when he said there will be a high price to pay.
что у нас тоже есть оружие, да знают об этом. Сейчас только я сказал, тоже есть оружие, которое
As I've just said, we also have weapons that can strike targets on their territory.
может поражать цели на их территории. И что все они
What are they up to now? What are they scaring the world with?
придумывают сейчас, чем пугают весь мир, что все это
That all this is a real threat to the conflict with the use of nuclear weapons, which means the destruction of civilization. Nuclear weapons.
реально грозит конфликтом с использованием ядерного оружия, а значит уничтожением цивилизации. Они чего этого не понимают?
Do they understand this? No, they don't, Vladimir Putin. They do not understand this, or they choose not to understand, I think is a better way to look at it.
Это люди, знаете, это люди, которые не
These are people who have not gone through difficult trials. They have already forgotten what war is. What an incredible point to make. All of those, from Emmanuel Macron to Joe Biden to Olaf Scholz, all of the major leaders, and also all of the major military leaders of these countries have no idea what the consequences of war really is. This is a point that has been made for a long time, especially about the United States. No idea what war really is, because either the United States has been going around the world with its superior military, destroying other countries much weaker than it, destroying them in ways where the cost for the United States, at least in terms of manpower and lives, was relatively small comparatively, and where the effects at home could be masked in many significant ways due to the changing character of warfare. But Vladimir Putin is saying here that Russia understands, because it wasn't so many generations ago, and arguably they definitely understand now in the conflict in Ukraine what the cost of war really is.
не прошли через тяжелые испытания. Они уже забыли, что такое война. Вот мы, даже наше сегодняшнее поколение,
We and even our current generation have gone through such difficult trials during the fight against international terrorism in the Caucasus. So Scott Ritter has been on here talking about this too, especially Chechnya, for example. I mean, there have been war. Russia has been fighting wars. Russia had to fight a war with Georgia. Russia had to fight a war in Chechnya. Russia, of course, World War II. Everyone knows what Russia had to go through. So, this doesn't even count all of the major provocations that could have led to nuclear war during the Cold War. So, Russia knows what war is.
Прошли вот через такие тяжелые испытания во время борьбы с международным терроризмом на Кавказе. Сейчас в условиях конфликта на Украине то же самое происходит. Они думают, что для них это все мультики какие-то.
This is all a cartoon from them. They're doing it in Ukraine, he said. This is all a cartoon from them. So that caught the attention of many people, but it definitely caught the attention of the BBC. So we're just going to listen to that really quick. It's a very quick segment because the BBC had this to say about it. And then I'll show you what Politico had to say about it. So here we go. So here's what BBC had to say.
It was President Putin's 19th State of the Nation address.
Спасибо, прошу вас.
And he used it to send this warning to Western nations. Don't send your troops to Ukraine.
Они должны, в конце концов, понимать, что у нас тоже есть оружие.
They need to understand, once and for all, that we have weapons too, that can strike targets on their territory, and everything they think up and scare the world with risks a nuclear conflict and the end of civilization.
Regarding Russia, he pledged to reduce poverty, boost the birth rate, and raise incomes. Well, there is an election coming up.
The cynicism of the Western mainstream media, the Russophobia is just off the wall. Because on the one hand, they cover the warning that Putin rightfully gave to NATO about the threat of nuclear conflict. It's a good warning. They should heed that warning. But then at the end, Russia, Putin says that they're going to raise incomes, reduce poverty. Oh, it's all about the election, right? That's all it is about. As if Russia hasn't been doing that, even over the last couple of years, trying to stave off the impact of sanctions and doing quite a good job in raising the livelihoods of people despite economic warfare leveled by the collective West. Still, it's cynicism, right? It's just all cynicism. It's all to paint a negative picture, a picture of Russia that is wholly negative and one where we can feel good about hating Russia. And so the Western mainstream media, there you're seeing just 20 seconds, subtle ways in which the Western mainstream media goes along with the provocations from NATO countries, right? It's in the pockets. It is completely subservient to the neocon foreign policy establishment that needs to heed Putin's warning. So here you have the BBC reporting on Putin's warning, and then going along with the very reason, going along with the very attempt by the collective West, which caught to wage this possible nuclear conflict that has lent itself to Putin needing to give a warning in the first place. So it's just shows. I mean, we're just seeing how absolutely desperate NATO is, the United States, these elites are in provoking this conflict with Russia. So friend of the show, Scott Ritter, was on Sputnik and had a great short summary of the speech overall, because I want to get away from the cynicism and move into why this speech was also important, not just as a warning to NATO, but also as a corrective to the absolutely cacophonous rhetoric we are hearing from the Western mainstream media about how dangerous Russia is. Because on the one hand, Russia has nuclear weapons, but I'll show you later that not even NATO believes that Russia is going to use nuclear weapons preemptively. There's no evidence of that. So here's what Scott Ritter had to say. He will be back on the show very soon, and I'll give you that announcement soon. But here we go.
Here, the priorities of Russia appear to be related to Russia's strategic nuclear deterrence and Russia's role in the world today. Vladimir Putin's address to Parliament came on the heels of a meeting in Europe hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron, where there there was a discussion about the potential of NATO nations entering into unilateral agreements with Ukraine to provide conventional military forces to Ukraine. Russia has said since the beginning of the special military operation that the deployment of NATO conventional forces into Ukraine would be a red line that would lead to not just the possibility, but the probability of direct conflict between Russia and NATO, which would more than likely end up being a general nuclear war. Fortunately, the majority of NATO nations who received Emmanuel Macron's suggestion rejected it out of hand because they understand the consequences. But that being said, it's somewhat disturbing that European nations and the United States continue to believe that Ukraine is a playground upon which they get to engage in activities designed to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia. And this is the important part of what Vladimir Putin's speech to Parliament emphasized. There will be no strategic defeat of Russia. Russia has built a very capable strategic nuclear deterrent that includes a variety of new weapon systems, nuclear powered cruise missiles, the Sarmat heavy strategic intercontinental ballistic missile, and the avant-garde hypersonic delivery system. All of these are new. They have no Western equivalent, and all are designed to defeat any Western defenses, missile defenses or otherwise, that could exist. All of these weapons guarantee that any nation that seeks to engage in a strategic conflict with Russia, a nuclear conflict with Russia, will not prevail.
Boom. And they're not going to prevail. NATO, in the United States in particular, does not have as many nuclear weapons as Russia. You might wonder, wow, Danny, why does Russia have so many nuclear weapons? And it's the most in the world. Why? Well, do you remember the Cold War? There were numerous threats of nuclear war during the Cold War. The Soviet Union was forced to build nuclear weapons. And then, of course, after the Soviet Union fell, it wasn't so long until the Wolfowitz Doctrine came around and the neocons started talking about balkanizing all of Russia, not just the Soviet Union, which had already been balkanized, right? All of the Caucasus states, the Baltic states, etc., delinked from the Soviet Union, supposedly independent now, although if you look at any one of these countries from Estonia to Lithuania, you wouldn't think of them as independent at all. But nonetheless, Russia has been targeted ever since, even during the early period of the fall of the Soviet Union. That's when the Wolfowitz Doctrine was released. So there's not going to be a strategic defeat of Russia because Russia has been preparing for this for many, many, many years.
While Russia may not be able to survive whatever retaliation these nations put forward, one thing is for certain: no nation will survive any effort to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia. Which brings us to the last and perhaps final part of Vladimir Putin's presentation to the Russian parliament. The idea of Russia as a nation of equal status in the world today. Russia is not a second-rate power. Russia is not a second-class citizen on the global stage. Russia is a major power that possesses a unique culture, a unique civilization. Russia is a nation that has earned its place in the world today. Indeed, according to Vladimir Putin, the world cannot exist without the Russian nation. And therefore, it's time for the United States, for Europe, for NATO, for all nations of the world to understand that Russia is here to stay. Russia is a part of the global community. And anybody who seeks to change this reality to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia is simply entering on a one-way trip to hell.
So that one-way trip to hell is outside of my window right now, as you can hear passing by. But that's exactly right. Russia is a nation of equal status. That's where the cynicism can be replaced by a new kind of optimism, one where these warnings should be seen not as dangerous, because some who don't know or understand the relationships of power, the balance of forces in the world might say, ooh, scary. Vladimir Putin is warning of potential nuclear war. What if Putin in Russia decides to just preemptively wage it? Well, what Scott Ritter is saying, what I've said here many times on this channel, that's not the imperative for Russia. Russia and Putin, when they warn about these red lines being crossed, what the warnings actually say is that Russia is a nation of equal status to the United States, to any country in the world, and it will be treated as such, or lest there's a major great power conflict, which does not really have an example in history to compare to. That is what Vladimir Putin was saying in that speech, that there is a possible conflict that could be ignited by NATO's actions, which will lead to more disastrous consequences than in prior periods when the United States, when Germany, etc., have tried to provoke and ultimately wage war on Russia's soil. You got to remember, the United States sent 10,000 troops to the Soviet Union in 1918 in an attempt to overthrow the Soviet Union, backing the so-called whites, those forces that were wholly against the establishment of the Soviet Union. And of course, there was World War II, where while the United States was supposedly on the Allied side, it had waited for Germany to power up in an attempt, in a hope that it would destroy the Soviet Union before Germany just started to destroy the rest of Europe, and of course, maybe set its sights on the United States. The United States sat on its perch thousands of miles away, waiting and hoping for the mutual destruction. So, nonetheless, that's the history. This is why Russia now is not going to be pushed around, and that these warnings should be heeded. From the news about Germany's leaked audio, the Air Force leaking their secrets that they are going to plan an attack on the Crimea Bridge for Ukraine, with Ukraine, and it's in a system in crossing that red line, or whether it's Emmanuel Macron being so confident and doubling down on this notion that NATO troops should be considered in Ukraine at some point in the very near future to confront Russia. All of this just shows how the hubris of the collective West is so enormous that it is willing to toe that line, to flirt with the potential of a nuclear conflict, just so it can serve Washington's geopolitical and imperial interests. Its interests primarily are to destabilize and weaken Russia. Everything it has done to do that has backfired, especially in regard to this now 2+ into the third year of this proxy war in Ukraine. Russia is getting stronger. Vladimir Putin, his speeches, his interview with Tucker Carlson, all of it shows that actually Russia is getting more confident, that it is not getting less confident, it is getting more confident in itself to stand up to the collective West, to demand it be treated equally. And that is the world historic moment that we live in, where these warnings, some people say, well, Russia and China too, both of these countries, while they may be charting a multipolar world, they're far too soft on the collective West. And I would push back on that and say, just by warning, just by demonstrating the ability to stand up, even verbally, right? Politics is about a lot more than just firing off weapons, than being aggressive and attempting to meet force with force. It's also about how you strategically, politically, ideologically maneuver on a stage that is being set by a confluence of forces that are not always in your favor, and how you follow the art of war, right? How you follow the art of war in many different avenues will ultimately determine whether you are victorious or whether you ultimately meet defeat. And I argue that Russia and China are playing chess while the United States is playing checkers. The United States is trying to just stack the checker chips on the world stage, take it all, and leave everyone with nothing. Russia and China are playing a long game of preservation for their own national interests, and also for the interests of long-held principles that ultimately lead to the progression of a multipolar world of peaceful development and of prosperity, not just for Russia and China, but for the rest of the world. So that is far different from the United States and NATO's imperatives, their interests. And just by being able to warn, just by being able to demonstrate that they have the capabilities of defending, striking back of potential attacks, it makes NATO, it makes the United States think twice about actually doing them. That is the art of war. It's a huge part of war, is being able to show you have the capabilities so that your enemy knows, or your adversary, your so-called adversary knows, that if you mess around, if you F around, then you're going to find out. And that should not be seen as a bad thing or soft, right? I see some people sometimes say, Danny, you know, these two countries, they should just end it with the United States. They should just put the United States, the neocons, out of their misery. No, that's not how this thing would work anyway. Because as we have seen throughout recent history, just in the last 2+ years, into the third year of this conflict, it is not Russia and China that cannot be trusted. It's the collective West. The collective West, we cannot rely on the collective West impulse control. They don't really have it. At any point, you have forces within the establishment across the collective West, especially in Washington, that are itching for an excuse to do the unthinkable with Russia and China, and be damned the consequences. So we have to reiterate, we have to reinforce that warnings are not just enough, but they are messages coming from someone like Vladimir Putin, which should be heeded. The interests of peace, the interests of peaceful development, the interests of prosperity for all, not just the tiny few, these principles, these interests are ultimately only met when these warnings are heeded. When the road to hell, which NATO and the United States and the collective West are on, is not followed, that we take ourselves off of that road. And so Putin's warning in this speech, this 2-hour speech, which also included many details of corridors that Russia's building, of integrating with the world economy, of building this multipolar world, with all that optimism, right? Improving the standard of living of Russian people. All that optimism, of course, was ignored. And all we got was, well, Russia is potentially going to wage nuclear war against the West. But even Politico, right after the speech, right after basically every single Western mainstream media outlet had declared that Vladimir Putin is going to wage nuclear war on the West, here you have Putin's bluffing on nukes, say top NATO official. We don't see any imminent threat of Russia using these weapons, said the military alliance's deputy secretary general. NATO's number 2 official said Russian President Vladimir Putin's nuclear threat is currently just psychological intimidation. Putin issued the warning Thursday as French President Emmanuel Macron stood by his message that the West could not rule out sending troops to help Ukraine fend off Putin's full-scale invasion. This really threatens a conflict with nuclear weapons, said Putin. But NATO Secretary General Deputy Mircea Gionia, sorry, I can't pronounce that name, characterized Putin's nuclear saber rattling as a discourse that delves into the logic of psychological intimidation rather than real intentions, he said in an interview with the Spanish newspaper El País, published Friday. We do not see any imminent threat of Russia using nuclear weapons, but these statements are in themselves very dangerous because they erode trust. Russia knows the consequences of taking such a step. So again, this is how they do it. They admit the truth, which is that Russia has no interest in using these nuclear weapons, but they always paint it as Russia's making a huge error, Russia's making a mistake, Russia is still an aggressor, Russia knows better, right? A lot of this finger wagging at Russia, when the big message out of that is that even NATO understands Russia's true position, and they are just more interested in distorting it for their own aims. So Vladimir Putin sent a major warning to NATO, one that was not just warranted, but one that should be heeded. France, Germany, the United States, and the rest of the NATO so-called alliance need to go on a course corrective. Really, they need to cease to exist as a so-called military alliance. But in lieu of that, it is very important that we point out that these warnings should be heeded, that there should be a course corrective, that it is NATO and the United States that are provoking a possible nuclear conflict, and that Ukraine is just one part of this, and a major part, one that has exposed all the fissures, all the weaknesses, all the deficits of the United States and its fledgling empire. What an empire that is fast on course to collapse. And that is the reason why Putin had to send a warning in the first place. All right. All right. So we are doing great on time. I'm going to cover Galloway, George, friend of the show, George Galloway's victory. Maybe get into one more story after that, and then we will be all good here. We have 6,700 people still watching, 2,800 or so likes. So please hit the like button. Helps get more people into the stream, boost the algorithm. If you have not already, hit that like button. Of course, subscribe to the channel, hit that subscribe button if you are new here, and go to the video description and become a member at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You get a free copy of my book, PDF copy of my book, which is right there on American exceptionalism, written in 2019. Really needs to be updated. Maybe one day I will be able to do that. You'll also get the ability to submit questions, guest suggestions, and so many more things. And there are many other ways to support this channel, from YouTube membership, PayPal, Substack, and Buy Me a Coffee, plus much more. Video description is all the places where you can find it. And we're going to get to the next story now, okay? Yeah, and I'm going to be back on Tuesday with Scott Ritter live Tuesday night. So that'll be the next time I am live. Friend of the show. He's now a regular guest on here, and we try to support each other. It's been, he's his analysis is really valuable. So he'll be here Tuesday, and I will give you more details at the end of the show. All right, everybody, let's get to this last story, shall we? Let me just pull up the materials while I do this. It's been great being back. I haven't done this in a while, so I appreciate all you bearing with me as I get my mojo back, so to speak. But we have a great story to cover here. And it's great because there's been a lot of pessimism, and I'm going to try to inject some optimism in a very disturbing political environment when it comes to Gaza in particular. So we're going to cover George Galloway, friend of the show, his election victory. And then maybe we can get to one more quick story if there's time. George Galloway is once again a member of Parliament in the United Kingdom. Now, George Galloway is a friend of this program. He's been a guest, I believe, several times now. And he is a fervent supporter of Palestine. He's also a champion of peace and one of the foremost, at least when it comes to politicians and former politicians, champions of the larger and broader fight against empire. He has been a long-standing opponent of empire, especially when it comes to the collective West. So George Galloway won a momentous, a real historic by-election, which occurred because the member of parliament for Rochdale died, and there was a by-election to replace him in the interim of a general election. And George Galloway ran on the Workers' Party of Britain ticket, the political party which he leads, and won in what was really a landslide, receiving over 40% of the vote and receiving more votes than I believe Conservative, Labor, the other parties in the parliament combined. And I believe the second most votes received were from another independent candidate. So Rochdale, here's DD Geopolitics, has a video of his, a brief clip of his speech, which I want to play, because Rochdale has rejected the consensus, the elite consensus in the UK, and it has done so on a mandate, not just to improve the lives of Rochdale. And you'll see that the Western mainstream media is trying to say that George Galloway is ignoring them. Not for a second is this true, but really it's a mandate to be an opponent of empire, which to me is a major development in the collective West, one we don't see very often. So here is what George Galloway had to say in the wake of his major election victory. Here we go.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. You have paid and you will pay a high price for the role that you have played in enabling, encouraging, and covering for the catastrophe presently going on in occupied Palestine in the Gaza Strip. I thank the people of Rochdale who voted for me in such numbers, but promised to work faithfully for all Rochdalians and to work for the day where you can again be born in Rochdale. Again, be born in Rochdale. I want to tell Mr. Starmer above all that the plates have shifted tonight. This is going to spark a movement, a landslide, a shifting of the tectonic plates in scores of parliamentary constituencies, beginning here in the Northwest, in the West Midlands, in London, from Ilford to Bethnal Green and Bow. Labour is on notice that they have lost the confidence of millions of their voters who loyally and traditionally voted for them generation after generation.
So what George Galloway is saying there is the reason why he was able to win is not just because he ran a campaign that people related to. This is for Gaza, he said, and there is a popular mandate all across the collective West to end Israel's onslaught. But not just that, but also because Labor, the Labor Party, has basically forfeited any reason to be confident in it, given that it has, with the leadership of Keir Starmer, taken the United Kingdom, taken the Labour Party, once known as a so-called progressive party and anti-war party, into the doldrums of neoconservatism, of empire. That is the reason why, or that is a major reason why George Galloway was able to win. And so no less did, and I'm not going to play this whole thing, but no quicker did George Galloway win the election that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the UK, hold his first press conference ever as Prime Minister just to respond and smear George Galloway. I mean, this was just a pathetic display, and I'll just play a small bit of this because you have to just see how worried the elite is in the UK with George Galloway's victory. Because what this means is that George Galloway who we know from the mother of all talk shows. You might have seen him on this program more than a few times. As a champion for Palestine, as a champion for peace in Ukraine, genuine peace that takes into account Russia's security interests, that genuinely wants to see the war campaign against China ended, that wants to see all of the resistance groups and countries all around the world that are under attack from the United States, the UK, and the collective West have their self-determination, that this person is now back as a member of parliament in a time where the elites' consensus, the elites' legitimacy could not be any more fragile than it is right now. So here's Rishi Sunak. Here's what he had to say in relation to George Galloway's win.
In recent weeks and months, we have seen a shocking increase in extremist disruption and criminality. What started as protests on our streets has descended into intimidation, threats, and planned acts of violence.
What is he even talking? I mean, this is literally just him reading a script from the Israel lobby. That's all Rishi Sunak is doing here. He's reading a script from the Israel lobby, talking about how people who support Gaza, who want to see this just absolute massacre and who want to see things like the Flower Massacre never happen again. I mean, the things that have been happening in Gaza, it's even hard for me to cover them at all. But from the Flower Massacre, killing over 100 Palestinians just because they were trying to get aid, there was some kind of baked tactic that Israel was using. All the videos we are seeing of them making fun, after committing massacres, making fun of Palestinians, of Muslims, of taking toys, and all kinds of just the most egregious war crimes being committed in the name of genocide in Gaza by Israel and its US and UK backers. Now they want to shift the blame, as they always do, to the people who want to see that end. And that's what they're trying to pin on George Galloway.
Jewish children fearful to wear their school uniform lest it reveal their identity. Muslim women abused in the street for the actions of a terrorist group they have no connection with.
So not only is he saying that George Galloway's victory is connected to so-called anti-Semitism, which really here is being said to be, Jews are being caught in the crossfire of what the Zionists are doing, which is, I don't even know if that's even true, because a lot of times this is based in no facts, right? People who are supposedly scared, when the reality is that it's Israel creating an atmosphere of intense rage. And he's also blaming Palestinians for the anti-Islam, anti-Arab sentiment, which was deliberately provoked by Zionists themselves and European governments and the US government to wage the war on terror. But yet, who's he blaming? George Galloway and the people who oppose the massacre in Gaza.
Now our democracy itself is a target. Council meetings and local events have been stormed. MPs do not feel safe in their homes. Long-standing parliamentary conventions have been upended because of safety concerns.
And that's all I'm going to play, because he's going to continue to go on and on. These tears. I don't want to play little Rishi Sunak's little tears about how everyone feels unsafe because George Galloway, because protesters, because people are angry with the Western political establishment, in particular in the United Kingdom, for essentially selling the country out to Israel so that Israel can do what it's doing to Gaza. That is one of the most despicable. I mean, I don't know if there's anything more despicable than that. But that's what Rishi Sunak was doing, blaming George Galloway, saying that he is the threat. That was his response. And of course, and now we're going to get into how George Galloway responded, because I think it was brilliant. We're going to play this because the media wanted to essentially, and I said this is what it looks like to tear down Western media lies and smear campaigns, because they are in panic over his election victory. And Sky News, this is an incredible, I'll try to play as much as possible. Sky News had an incredible interview with George Galloway, not because Sky News did a great job, but because George Galloway absolutely demolished the reporter. And of course, who the reporter worked for, you can see him on his phone. He has this script where he's trying to reference it. And what is he saying? He's saying, oh, well, my masters want me to say this. So George Galloway, what do you think about that? Okay, my master said this. George Galloway, can you please respond to Rishi Sunak, my master? You know, like this is how politics works now in the collective West. How the media works, the mainstream media. They are nothing but appendages, nothing but another estate to the military apparatus, to the empire. So here is the interview. Here is, and basically, we didn't have to listen to Rishi Sunak at all because this journalist, so-called, will show you what the elite in the UK are saying, Sunak and others, about George Galloway's victory. So here we go.
I'm standing here at George Galloway's campaign headquarters. George Galloway, did you just watch the Prime Minister's speech?
I didn't watch it, but I understood the first part of it related to the Rochdale by-election.
The Prime Minister has just said that your election of you to Parliament is beyond horrifying. What do you say to that?
Well, I can understand how disappointed he is about the by-election. The Conservative Party, which is the government of the country, was crushed, not just by me, but by an independent candidate that no one had ever heard of before outside of Rochdale. So it was a disastrous night for the Conservatives and a disastrous night for Labour. I got more votes than Labour and the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats and the Reform Party put together, which adds up to a pretty crushing rejection of the two-party system. So I understand why he's alarmed.
I want you to address some of the specifics that the Prime Minister said about you this evening. He said that you backed Hezbollah. Is that true?
I don't know what that means, backed Hezbollah. I oppose Israel's occupation of Lebanon, and I respect the right of people in occupied territory to resist their occupier. And I've done so since Hezbollah was formed and Israel occupied much of Lebanon.
So George Galloway has a long history of fighting on behalf and in defense of Palestinian rights, self-determination, and of course the larger resistance regionally to occupation, Israeli, and of course the Western imperial forces that have backed Israel in this conquest, in these objectives for decades upon decades. So that's George Galloway's history. But what's interesting is this reporter, how many times did he have to say that, and you'll see it, he's going to continue to repeat himself. Oh, Rishi Sunak says this is horrifying. Rishi Sunak says this is horrifying. What do you have to say to that? It's almost as if he expected George Galloway to say, well, I agree with him. Of course, George Galloway is going to say that it was his victory that has made them all so scared, because that's true. They don't want to cover. Sky News doesn't want to cover how George Galloway's victory was a landslide that demonstrates the massive popular mandate to end this onslaught in Gaza and to bring peace, an agenda of peace back on the table in British politics, so that the problems of the UK can be solved themselves. But here we go. We need to continue.
Right up to the Litani River, regularly bombing Beirut and so on. So I'm not sure what business that is of his, because you see,
Hezbollah are a terrorist organization.
Actually, they're part of the government of Lebanon, a country with which we have sovereign diplomatic relations.
Who is this so-called journalist that is trying to lecture George Galloway, someone who literally has been doing this for decades, has put his life on the line? There's another video with another Western media outlet where he literally outlined how he was assaulted. I believe it was 10 years ago. He was assaulted in the streets for his support for Palestine, and that's why he wears a hat. Someone who has put his body on the line. Who is this thing to try to lecture him on Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. Really? That's journalism? Seems like you're trying to give the answers rather than ask the questions.
I had this debate with Sky's Anna Botting in 2006. It's quite an epic clip. You should watch it. More than 100 million people have. They said all these things about me in the by-election. And in the by-election, it was them that got crushed in the democratic process. So I'm not sure why he would reheat it now.
The Prime Minister is saying
talk
that
as if
you are...
this is God. We're talking about little Rishi Sunak in the fag end of his prime ministership. Don't talk to me as if he's come down from the mount with tablets of stone. The things that he says are somehow meant to awe me. They may awe you, they don't awe me.
A lot of people have just watched what the Prime Minister said. This is your opportunity to respond to what he said.
Well,
he says that there are forces here at home trying to tear us apart. He is implying you are a divisive figure. You have run an election campaign that has tried to appeal, particularly, not entirely, to one section of the community.
Who won the election? Me or Rishi Sunak? I've got the Democratic mandate here.
So Rishi Sunak is not God. And that is exactly the correct response to when someone in mainstream media, Western mainstream media, is trying to beat you over the head with government talking points. This is what they always do. And George Galloway just handled that. I mean, you couldn't have handled it any better.
Here, not Rishi Sunak. He didn't even come second. He was lucky to come third. So don't put to me statements made by Rishi Sunak as if I'm supposed to be impressed by them. He don't impress me much.
We at Sky have spent some time today on the streets of Rochdale, and there are people who say that they feel intimidated by people like you and the people that have supported you.
I have just
and they have pointed out that you have concentrated your campaign on foreign affairs, and they worry that Rochdale will not be the winner.
That's my answer to you. I was just elected with a thumping majority by the electorate in Rochdale. That's all that matters to me.
So why are there people in the streets of Rochdale today worried?
Well, people voted yesterday, and they voted for me. Why is that difficult for you to grasp?
Why are there people on the streets worried?
There may be people who didn't vote for me who are worried, but the majority, the thumping majority, voted for me. I've got the mandate, and I'm going to the House of Commons with it. And
why are people worried? Why are people worried? What is it? This is not journalism. You didn't provide any evidence, no sources, no, here's the person I spoke to. Didn't bring the people into the campaign headquarters. You didn't give any evidence. You were just trying to spread innuendo. And George Galloway, again, handled it perfectly. He said, I got the mandate. I got the majority. Why should I be concerned about the people who didn't vote for me? That's their right. They didn't vote. Maybe they don't like me. Guess what? The vast majority of people support me, and I am going to govern with that mandate. That's just basic politics. And this is something that it has been lost in the collective West. The collective West is completely lost in this regard. They don't even try to follow the so-called mechanisms of quote unquote democracy that they champion so much. This is not about that. This is about empire, and they're very mad at George Galloway for being an opponent of it.
And it's a mandate, you think, to do what? Because there are people that listen to what you say about whether or not Israel has a right to exist, what you say about what many Jewish people think are threatening
we had this
slogans.
Conversation last night. Why are you reheating it?
Because in the light of the Prime Minister's
don't keep
statement.
telling me about the Prime Minister as if he was Moses.
Do you not respect the Prime Minister?
Do I respect the Prime Minister? I despise the Prime Minister. And guess what? Millions and millions and millions of people in this country despise the Prime Minister. I don't respect the Prime Minister at all.
What are you planning to do next?
Change the subject. That was just, if there was the meme of all the people falling back and, just going, Oh, I mean, that would be the moment because George Galloway completely destroyed him there. Who is he talking to? Of course, George Galloway is not running on a political campaign or orientation or platform that supports Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak is not just George Galloway's opponent. He is the opponent of the vast majority of people everywhere in the world because Rishi Sunak represents the tiny minority of the elite that seek to wage war, plunder, profit for the very few at the expense of the majority worldwide and in the United Kingdom. So, of course, that's, I mean, this is just putting the shoe right in your mouth, right? It's like when George W. Bush had the shoe thrown at him in Iraq, it's like taking that shoe and putting it in your mouth. That's what this guy is doing here.
Next week when you arrive in Parliament?
Well, I'm meeting the Speaker on Monday morning, and then I'll be introduced and sworn in. I'll be escorted by the Right Honourable David Davis MP, former Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. I don't know why he would do that if he thought I was the kind of man you're clearly implying that I am. David Davis is one of the great parliamentarians of today and this age. And I'll be taking my seat in the House of Commons and speaking for the people of Rochdale. That's what I was elected to do.
And what is your message also to Keir Starmer?
My message to Keir Starmer is that the skids are under you in scores of Labour seats up and down the country because you've lost the trust, you've lost the confidence of millions of your traditional loyal voters.
Now we have now had an election where two of the candidates have alleged intimidation. The Prime Minister referenced that intimidation in his address on the steps of
to the Prime Minister as if that's supposed to impress me. The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister is a rather diminutive, diminished and degraded politician. He made a party political statement. I don't care about Rishi Sunak's attitude. What I care about is that the returning officer, a man of unimpeachable integrity, I'm sure you'll agree, declared it a free and fair election and me as the winner, and Rishi Sunak as one of the crushed two big parties in the state.
So why are two candidates
keep repeating the same questions to me because I have other people to talk to? So let's make this the last one, shall we? We got a party to deal with.
Allegations of intimidation, allegations that your supporters intimidated other candidates.
What times you've said that? The returning officer declared it last night. You were there as a free and fair election, and me as the winner.
And the Electoral Commission today have said that they're going to look and talk to the parties.
Have to just suck it up. I won the election.
I mean, look at the people who are surrounding George Galloway. I mean, those are the people. These are the people. These are people who obviously support George Galloway's platform. They're people who are obviously opposed to what the so-called impartial media, the Western mainstream media, are doing here. What Sky News, I mean, Sky News has long been a complete I mean, it's Australian media, which of course means it's a subsidiary of the United States, and it has long been discredited. But here, I mean, look at this position. Look at this. There's nothing. Look at this. This is an image, right? Just here. People should screenshot this, take it, spread it. Here you have underneath the headline, it says, Prime Minister says the streets are hijacked by those hostile to our values. It also said that Sunak says that democracy is under attack in the United Kingdom because of this. And here you have George Galloway here, this position, walking away from this absolutely loserish, this complete and utter imbecile who is just carrying water for genocidaires and the empire as a whole. And look at the people in complete support of him. Look at, I mean, that's just, I'll just play the last 5 seconds here.
George Galloway, thank you very much indeed.
Look at that face. There you go. Everyone's cheering. That is the face of defeat. I mean, that's the face of defeat. You don't even have to put the Labor Party's candidate, who they claim they disowned, that they didn't take out of the race, but they said don't vote for him. It was a strange by-election indeed, but nonetheless one that points to, I think, a really hopeful scenario. It really points to something that I think we all need sometimes, which is hope for the future. And there's many more examples of this. It's not just George Galloway's victory. So what I think I'm going to do is, I just want to talk really quickly about other things that are happening around the world in relation to Palestine. It's not just George Galloway's victory. You also had at the end of February, as these votes were being prepared in Rochdale, you had China at the International Court of Justice supporting Palestine's right to armed resistance. You have Hamas, Fatah, and Palestinian resistance groups in Moscow talking about the potential of a unity government in Gaza, representative of the resistance forces. You have Nicaragua filing against Germany at the ICJ too, in response to Germany's support of Israel. You have Cuba joining a massive worldwide march in support of Palestine. And then you also have a British tanker being sunk by Yemen. It took 4 days for that boat to sink, but this cargo ship was sunk because Yemen and Ansar Allah have continued their support of Palestine. So when you think that there is no hope for the situation in Gaza, when you see the images, the horrific images of what Israel is doing, this ongoing genocide, the Flower Massacre, just absolutely egregious crimes, when you see the United States explicitly endorsing this, protecting Israel at all costs, doing absolutely the bare minimum around these so-called ceasefire talks, that can lead easily to despair. But George Galloway's victory, the multipolar world's efforts, all of those things need to be heeded and paid attention to, because they show that, in fact, it is the global majority's opinion that what Israel is doing is not just wrong, but needs to be stopped immediately. And of course, you might ask, well, Danny, that's all well and good, but what kind of impact can it have? That right there is the problem and the contradiction. It's you have Russia, you have China, you have essentially most of West Asia, the axis of resistance. You have countries, progressive countries all over the world supporting the Palestinian cause. But then you have the United States, you have Israel, you have the collective West using their force, their influence, creating tripwires everywhere so that this support cannot be as effective as it should be. What Ma Xinmin did at the ICJ, China's envoy did, what he did at the ICJ to support the right of armed resistance for the Palestinian people is a major step, because that is enshrined in international law. And it demonstrates that if the people of the world, if the countries all over the world that support Palestine were able to operate freely, then we would have a free Palestine right now, because the Palestinian people would be able to free themselves. But it's because Israel has carte blanche support, protection from the empire. That's the tripwire. That's the razor wire that makes it so the Palestinian people have to suffer from this scourge. And that is what we need to focus on. We are not over there. We are in the epicenter of the empire. So George Galloway's victory shows that there are many people who want to see this thing end. And it's all about putting the feet into motion and the people into motion to make that happen. And that's what this program is all about. That is what these reports, this analysis is supposed to generate. Things like what happened in Rochdale, an election of someone who truly does stand with the people, with the Palestinian people, and with all people who are supporting self-determination for Palestine and also for the rest of the world, which wants to see anything like what's happening to Palestine end wherever it may be happening. So it's a huge victory. Hopefully we can get Mr. Galloway, George Galloway, on this program again soon. I'm sure he's very, very, very busy. But nonetheless, it's a huge victory against this Israeli onslaught, against those forces that back it. And we have to remember that when it looks like backs are against the wall, that this mass murder regime, genocidal regime is not going to be stopped, things can happen which can set into motion the defeat of those we think are not defeatable, we think are invincible. Israel is not invincible. This will end. The sacrifice of the people of Palestine will not be forgotten. And the majority of the world will correct this problem. So really, it's time that is running out. And George Galloway's victory is a big sign of that. And it is clear that the political situation all over the collective West is mightily unstable, and that the global majority, once that instability leads to a political crisis and a military crisis, as it is quickly forming in so many aspects from Ukraine to Asia and into the Middle East, as these crises develop, there will be more opportunities. And those are the opportunities we need to seize to end the plight and the suffering of the Palestinian people. And most, I think, importantly, to provide conditions for the Palestinian people so they can free themselves, because that's what this is all about. It's about self-determination. It's about not saving anyone, but in giving and creating a political environment in the instigating countries, in the political milieu that is creating the problem, creating the atmosphere so that this siege can finally end. And so George Galloway, his victory is a big piece toward that. Just one piece. And of course, there's so much more work to do, but it is a major, I think, shot in the arm to the movement. And it will, I think, have reverberations far beyond Rochdale. So that's it, everybody. I kind of combined, I thought I was going to do two stories, but I kind of combined two in one because I thought, I didn't want, I would have been on till like much later. So that's it for the stories for tonight. 5,000 plus people still watching. Please do continue to hit that like button if you have not yet. I have some. Maybe I will get to the story. I don't know. Let's see. No, I don't think so. Let me. Oh yeah, I have some announcements and some things I want to say. Okay. All right. So number one, what's coming up? Okay, for me in the next. Let's do this over the next week and then into the month and into next month. So for me, okay, a few announcements. Tuesday, March 5th, that is, I'll have returning and guest friend of the show, Scott Ritter. We will go over a lot of these developments. Maybe there'll be some new ones, but we will review the 2+ years of the Ukraine conflict. We will talk about some of these latest developments that have been occurring around it. We will also talk about some of these other developments regarding the Middle East, Gaza, and beyond. I've been meaning to get into more conversations about travel because I am going back to China in April, and he's been, I think, putting out some really good content about Russia to kind of mimic the position that I have with regard to China. And so I think the conversation about this will make, to have an ongoing conversation about this will just continue to make more and more sense through our collaborations. And so Scott Ritter has been great for his collaborations here, and I try to support his work, doing waging peace as much as possible, because I think he has an important goal in countering Russophobia, and as my goal is in many ways to counter Sinophobia. So with that said, he's going to be on Tuesday. And then I think the next guest will be Pepe Escobar on Friday morning, my time, Eastern time. So hopefully we can get some of the, for those in Europe and Russia and Asia can tune into that one, because it'll be early. It'll probably be 10 a.m. Eastern time, which is very early for me. And so that'll probably be Friday. Then I'm going to be away again for through the 11th through the 19th. There will be no streams. I'll just be publishing clips from past streams until I return later on that month. And who knows, okay. That's been happening a lot with this Mac. If I do a certain movement, there will be a like thumb that comes up. It's very strange. But anyway, that's what's up for the month of March. Hopefully I can get, definitely George Galloway. I want to get Richard Medhurst back on this program. I have a lot of folks that I do want to get back on this program to talk everything from Palestine to Ukraine and beyond. And then in April, I do plan on streaming a good amount in April, but I will also be away this time to China for about 9 days or so. I believe I'll be arriving the 15th and then leaving the 24th. And that'll be Beijing. And I think I'll be going to some other sites in China that I haven't been to, Zhejiang province and Yunnan. So should be a great trip. And I'll definitely be reporting out from there, making videos as much as I can. And I've also been invited to, there's a lot of invitations rolling in to go to China, so I might be there twice more this year minimum. I'm hoping to go on another trip to Xinjiang, do some reporting out there, collaborating. So the relationships with China are building and growing, even amid the fact that you have the fire in Palestine and the absolute collapse of the Ukraine conflict, all of that I cover so much here. But I will be reporting a lot in China as well, because that's also a big part of this channel. So it'll be great. And we will, and I'll make sure that you have updates on that as the time comes, and as things develop. So with all that said, so some people have said it's my birthday today. If you thought it was my birthday today, I'm sorry. I appreciate that you thought it was my birthday. It's almost my late father's birthday, a couple days. So not my birthday. That's in a couple months. I'll announce that to all of you if I go on stream during that time. I'm a May baby. So, but it's not my birthday, but hey, it's a great day because it's my first live stream in like 2 weeks. So, that's great. Or at least a little under 2 weeks, but it's been a while. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to give some shout outs now, and we'll, let's give some shout outs to the super chatters first, though. Thanks to everyone who is a paid member of Patreon, Substack, who's watching the program, YouTube members. Let me see. Sometimes I can glean out the YouTube members in the chat. Let's see. Oh, yeah, we have Miss Dwayne Vogel in the chat. And I know some of the moderators are also members. So thank you. So, yeah, thanks to all the members in the chat. Thanks to all the Patreon subscribers, Substack subscribers, anyone who's giving on PayPal or buy me a coffee. Again, all those links can be found in the video description to support this work. Now I'm going to get to the super chats. Okay. One thing I need to do is I need to get a haircut. So here we go. So KL, happy birthday, Danny. Well, I think somebody in the beginning said it was my birthday, and I think, was that like I don't know if that was they just genuinely thought it was my birthday before the show started, but I saw that right as I started the show, and I was just like, okay, I'm not gonna make a thing out of this to begin the show. But thank you, KL. It's not my birthday, but hey, I'm alive, and I'm grateful for that. So appreciate you. Sparky says George Galloway really stuck it to your boy from Sky News. I've been on Sky News actually to talk about China a couple of times, and I gotta say it was a really bad experience. I mean, the Western mainstream media is no good. I think I've been on one other like local channel. I've never been on CNN or MSNBC or something like that. But I've been on Sky News, and I've been on some local Chicago. That was actually nice because they were talking about W.E.B. Du Bois, and they wanted to talk about my book on American exceptionalism because I wrote some about Du Bois. And that was okay, but this was just it's just bad, man. Sky News is really it's really low level stuff. I'm talking, it's just hostile. There's no room for actual political real conversation about these issues at all. So thanks, Sparky. Thank you again, Sparky. Thank you again, Sparky. Yes, free Assange. KL says the global elite will meet their end. Yeah, I believe so. Thank you so much for your contribution. Here's Nobody says free PDF. Okay. Thank you, Nobody. I know that you share this often. So look up for The World Teacher for All of Humanity by Benjamin Cream. So Sparky says build a better world with bricks. And yes, Sparky, I really appreciate your slogans, which have a real, I think, appreciated political content to them. Don't even leave a patch called Ukraine unless it remains a NATO playground, carpetbagger, money laundry, and becomes a BlackRock property. KL says one-way trip to hell. I'm not with the garbage West. Yes. Me either. Here is Karen Shringa. Thank you so much for becoming a new member, Kareen. Kareen. I said Karen. Sorry, Kareen. Thank you. Sparky says Rishi Sunak was groomed to become an empty-headed puppet and capable of critical original thought. His school literally didn't offer history courses to help ensure this. Hey, I don't know much about Rishi Sunak other than British politics, actually. I always say this to my friend Carlos in London about the left in the UK, because the left in the United States has huge problems. And I'm not even talking about Democratic Party. No, I don't consider that the left. But people even outside of it, there's a lot of problems with divisions and nastiness and sectarianism and an inability to work together and all this stuff. And I always say to him, man, the UK is even worse. So the United Kingdom has many problems from all levels of politics. And so it's hard for me to even take most of it seriously, because from Boris Johnson, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, and Rishi Sunak, I mean, this is a clown show. I mean, at least Obama was the more effective evil. I mean, this guy was evil, but he was vastly effective, and that's nothing I support. I railed against him for years, for most of his tenure, especially the second half when I started to pay attention to these things, beginning in 2012, 2013. No, I railed against the guy because of what he did, but I understood that there was an effectiveness to his brand, an effectiveness to how he was trained and conditioned and put out there by the elite. But when I look at the UK, I'm just like, what is going on here? Boris Johnson, Theresa May, and who's the other? Liz Truss. Like, what is even happening in the United Kingdom? I don't know. It's a mess. Europe, to me, blows my mind in terms of that, because the United States is a far cry from exceptional, right? Its exceptionalism is always a lie, but it's exposed for all to see now as a complete farce. But geez, like, at least Joe Biden isn't established, for as addled as he is, as problematic as he is. You heard Vladimir Putin. What did Vladimir Putin say about Biden? He said, we know who he is because he's been around for a long time. I mean, what else is there to say? At the very least, even if he's addled, even if he's incompetent, even if he can barely talk and what have you. His politics are very predictable. The UK, I just don't understand that in so many ways. But Rishi Sunak to me is just such a prototype of what the modern day neocon is at this point. Just a complete talking head, like a puppet on puppet strings. A Muppet, really. So thank you, Sparky. Leslie, thank you so much for that. And thank you for your membership as well. So here's Sparky again. Every time anyone says Israel is our only friend in the Middle East, I can't help but think that before Israel, we had no enemies in the Middle East. Very good. U.S. missionary John Sheehan. Thanks, Sparky, for all your contributions. And thanks, everyone, for all of your contributions. So some people are saying, oh, no, it's not my birthday. Yes, I was not trying to trick anyone. I don't know where. There were people misleading in the chat. It was very interesting. But no worries at all. Dana says, greetings from Prague. Deep respect for your reporting and also for Scott Ritter. Thank you, Dana. I was in Prague actually last summer, so it was beautiful, but I have to say, I was shocked by the high costs of like everything in Prague. And I wasn't a local or like I don't have any native ties or anything like that, so I know very little about the Czech Republic other than it's a small rendezvous in the socialist bloc. And then I went to a museum about it, even though the museum kind of smeared it a lot that time for the Czech Republic. But I I also I just couldn't believe, like, we would venture outside of the touristy areas, and I was still shocked by how many Czech crowns it costs to buy very basic things. So really the sanctions and I could really see the impact. But greetings, Dana from Prague. Thank you so much for your very generous contribution to this channel and for your respect for the work that we do here. So, with all that said, everybody, I'm just going to say a few more words. We had a great stream today. I had been away for a little bit because it wasn't because I was doxxed. My employer was publicized by Stop Anti-Semitism. And I did catch a little bit of hell for that for a few days earlier in the month, but I was still active. I still did streams and stuff. The reason why I took off was because I was working on licensure for my other gig and had to take an exam, which I literally took on the 29th of February, and I'm done. I passed. And so, next steps in that chapter, which really is a reduction, like that license will help me reduce my work there, actually, hopefully, while hopefully increasing here, continue to increase here, this kind of work, which is really what I want to do most, at least what I want to do with more of my time. So that's what I was doing for like the last week of February, and I couldn't really be live during that time because I needed to really focus and get my mind right, because early in February I was pretty stressed. While I do not really care about intimidation from Zionists as much, because I've experienced that before when I was in college, and experienced that in my work during prior escalations in the occupation of Palestine and the ongoing siege and war waged on the Palestinian people. I've experienced it before, but this time I had to deal with an employer, and usually I haven't had to do that because it didn't directly go to them, but this time it did. So I had to deal with that. Probably still have to deal somewhat with that in the future, but nonetheless, I'm protecting myself. I had to get legal counsel, all kinds of nonsense. Palestine Legal, good people though, good people. If you get any issues, if you're out there getting any legal issues, I highly do recommend talking to the people at Palestine Legal. They'll connect you with somebody. You just look up Palestine Legal. They'll connect you with somebody who will at least give you some advice when you don't really know there's a lot of gray areas, of course, in legality under empire, as you all probably know. So, with that said, and some people have been mad at me on this channel. There has been a little bit of a shift, not away from Gaza because I wanted to, but because of that doxing, I really had to, first of all, go back to my roots, because Russia, China, multipolarity, that is my roots. That is where I'm most expert in. I'm not going to sit here. I could do, I didn't have, I don't have all the time in the world right now to be like, train myself to be like a Palestine historian and an analyst. I think I can hold my own, but I'm not trying to do that. I want to platform people who are doing that, who have done such great work. I mean, I'm hoping to have Low Key back on, Ali Abunimah back on as this continues to go on, George Galloway, people like that who, have a much broader history than I do. But some viewers have gone a little bit mad, thinking I'm ignoring this subject. I'm not intentionally, but there are some personal circumstances and also political circumstances that will lend me to, I'm one person, it will lend me to balance out all of this coverage here, because this channel, I just want to reiterate, this channel is about geopolitics as a whole, and it's about this shifting world order. And certainly what's happening in West Asia, Gaza, is a huge part of that. But of course, I'm going to continue to cover what's happening all around the world, especially in relation to Russia and China, because that's where I really began on YouTube. But it's also something I've been focusing on for quite a long time. I've been focusing on that issue, on that part of this changing world for many, many, many years. And while I have always been, since I've been someone who could say they paid attention to worldly affairs, international affairs, global politics, always sympathetic and in solidarity with Palestine, have written about it, have really made it a priority, whether it's on social media or in activism or what have you. I've always been someone who tries to integrate everything together. So, I leave it to the folks at Electronic Intifada, boosting them, to those who are really doing some really expert work on this issue, from Palestinians themselves to people like Richard Medhurst and others who are vastly more knowledgeable about it than me, to that. And hopefully in the near future, I can continue to platform them on my channel and ensure that that perspective gets out there. And of course, if you subscribe on Patreon, that's the best place to suggest guests to me. But of course, you can do it for free otherwise. But that's one of the perks of subscribing on Patreon, is that you can suggest guests and remind me, hey, Danny, there are these really cool people doing stuff on Palestine, when my mind is like everywhere. I don't really have a one day maybe I will have someone who can do some of these admin tasks for me, but right now that's me. So you all are great. I appreciate you. I covered, 3 topics today. I said I was going to cover 4. Unfortunately, just doesn't look like that's in the cards, but I will be back on the 5th, and then hey, maybe even the 4th if I'm feeling really ambitious and something, and there's really something pressing to cover. But probably the 5th with Scott Ritter, and then the morning of the 8th, and then maybe the 9th at night. Okay, so I'm just looking at the calendar. Then I'm away beginning the 11th, and I'll try to pre-post clips and all of that for those who cannot join live streams like this, because live streams like this take a lot of commitment. And we had about, I think we had 7,000 people at a peak. So amazing, incredible for an individual stream. You all humble me so much with your support. We still have 4,000 here. Just listen to me ramble about announcements, etc. But with all that said, everybody, this was a great stream. I appreciate all of you. I don't know if I got any more. Yeah, okay, there we go. That's all for the super chats. I appreciate everyone in the chat, from YouTube members, moderators. Wow, I mean, it was a fast chat tonight, especially for solo stream. So all of you did just incredible. Desert Mantis, Connie, Ware, I believe you are the moderators for this evening. Oh, I see Joe at WS here. Oh my gosh, I forgot about you, Joe. Sorry. Don't get mad. You don't post as much, I don't think. So sorry, the chat was going really fast and I didn't see you. But Joe, thanks so much for your assistance. And one thing I want to just say is that the reason why I plug so much, I know some people get angry plugging about Patreon, Substack. It's not just because supporting this channel is important financially. It's also because, look, I'm friends with Richard Medhurst. I'm friends with many people who have suffered major demonetization on YouTube. I right now I'm only suffering. I don't know if it's gonna happen to me tonight, but I do often get yellow icons, especially whenever I mention Gaza. So with that said, if I'm ever talking about Gaza, you can, or usually anything related to the Middle East sometimes gets a yellow icon, meaning just like ad revenue is not really going to be coming in. It's kind of like a soft demonetization. But with that said, you know, it's at any moment it could happen to me. I'm not going to be naive. So what I like to do is I like to say, please do go to Rumble and follow me there. Okay, here's my Rumble channel, and I'll put the link in the chat. All right. So definitely follow me on Rumble, but you know, so that if I need to make a transition there full time, you all have the link. Now, in addition to that, you know, Patreon, well, Patreon, Substack, these aren't perfect platforms. Buy me a coffee, etc. All of those places, though, are places where you can support my work monetarily. Should YouTube stop your ability to send a super chat, stop your ability for your views and whatnot to make me any revenue at all. Oftentimes, to be honest, because of the content that I talk about, ad revenue is often quite small comparatively. I have spoken to people about this because I was very curious. I've noticed discrepancy in like view counts, like my videos get a lot of views and then the revenue is low end for a lot of views. And I'm like, what's going on? And so I talk to people. I know people who do YouTube now, and they say, well, advertisers, YouTube can decide however amount of money it wants to pay based on ad revenue, even when it says it has rules. It's really all arbitrary. So with that said, that's why it's important to support this program on Patreon, on Substack. Become a YouTube member while you can. We have a great community there. And buy me a coffee and PayPal are also great options. So all of this is like a security for what could happen in the future. So I'm hoping it doesn't happen. Dwayne, thanks for being here. You're a member as well. But you know, you just never know. And so I don't want to leave it up to chance. So that's why I remind you guys. But I appreciate all of you. I'm heading out for the evening. Thanks so much for all of your support. I will see you on Tuesday. Okay. Tuesday, March 5th, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Scott Ritter will join me. Let's try to make that a huge one. I think last time we almost got 9,000 views. Let's keep that up. So save the date, 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday. Okay. Take good care. Good night. And I will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.